Give me a thumbs up. Okay. Hi, Richa. Welcome to The Wire. This is Siddharth Varadarajan and Richa Gupta. Richa is an economist with Deloitte, a consulting firm, and we have brought her to our office to essentially help us navigate some of the highlights of Mr. Arun Jaitley's budget that he presented today at 11 o'clock. We had an earlier Facebook session with myself and my colleague Anuj Srivas, where we, in a way, looked at the big political picture that the budget involved, and what I'm hoping to do in the next half an hour with Richa Gupta and hopefully with you participating with questions that you may have, is to get down in the weeds as far as some of the specific proposals are concerned, and look at how this might impact you as a citizen, as a consumer, as a taxpayer, as a farmer, as a housewife, as a student, in any way, how this budget will affect you. And Richard, let's start with kind of the question that was topmost on everybody's mind, right? We've been so consumed over the last 3 months with demonetization and its impact on the macroeconomy. Virtually anybody who has a serious view on the economy has been saying that the slowdown is already there and further slowing down is on the cards. So Mr. Jaitley walked into this budget exercise with the cards stacked against him, right? I mean, the slowdown and all the consequent effects of that staring him in the face. Given that this is the first post-demonetization budget, and given what we know about the ill effects or the side effects of demonetization, what were you expecting the budget to contain? Are there measures that you see in the budget that are intended to address some of those effects? Are there things that Mr. Jaitley could have done but didn't? How would you assess this budget in that immediate context of demonetization?
Yes, so that's correct. Everybody was expecting that the budget would address some of the fallouts of the demonetization that have happened, that we have seen over the last couple of months, and there were expectations that there's going to be negative impact coming for the next, at least the first half of this year as well. So, however, there was a talk of he may introduce measures like targeted universal basic income, some sort of a targeted support to people who have been...
Compared to GST?
Yes, he compared to GST. So he is looking at the longer term benefits that may arise as we move to a more digital economy, as we move to a more cashless transaction, and maybe even a more transparent economy. So he's focusing on that. He is not focusing on the immediate short term.
Right.
For the immediate short term, I think what they're banking on is the push they're giving to the rural infrastructure, to the agriculture credit schemes, agriculture, sanitation, health schemes. So that's where their focus is going to be, apparently. They're looking to increase budgetary allocations to the rural sector, to the farming sector, and hoping that the implementation will proceed on time so that the gains can be the gains can negate the side effects of demonetization.
In a way, that's been the approach of the government for the last 2 years, and even before that, the UPA government looking at rural infrastructure, rural schemes, to boost demand and also augment infrastructure in the countryside. Based on the pace of change that we've seen over the past 2 years, and the fact that allocations have not always matched the hype, would you say that the numbers that Mr. Jaitley has earmarked, and I know you'll still have to obviously pore over the budget documents in greater detail, but in terms of a first effect, broad brush assessment, would you say that the kind of money that he's throwing into these sectors would help to deal with that 1% reduction in growth rate that demonetization has caused?
See, one of the primary schemes that has been used by successive governments, UPA and this government, has been the Manrega.
Right.
So the budgetary allocation to Manrega is actually quite good. It was good in the prior years also. It has steadily increased.
Right.
And Manrega has led to income generation, especially in times of distress at the ground level. Of course, there have been leakages there as well, but that's with any big scheme.
Right.
So in terms of putting the numbers, yes, the exercise has been done.
Right.
Now the issue again comes back to actually following those numbers up with actually spending that money in a targeted way and monitoring, the implementation of it.
Okay.
So for some of the schemes, they have announced that Niti Aayog will do an outcome-based expenditure monitoring. So if they're able to do that, even for 1 or 2 schemes, and then later extend it to all their social sector schemes, that will be a very good move.
Right. Now tell me, one of the significant pushes that Mr. Jaitley made is for the MSMEs, the medium and small scale industry, which he rightly identifies as prior victims of the complexity in tax rates. He noted how MSMEs were effectively paying a tax rate of around 30%, while the biggest companies in India were much lower than that, around 25%. And with the stroke of a pen, he has reduced corporate tax on MSMEs. I think companies with a turnover of less than 50 crore, which is quite a substantial amount actually. He has said that corporate tax will now be at 25%. Now, given that these companies are also presumably the backbone of the Make in India scheme of the government, as well as perhaps the sole or most reliable employment generator, do you think that this tax cut of 5% effectively will be incentive enough for the MSMEs to step up to the plate and play the kind of role that the government wants them to play?
See, tax incentives by themselves cannot be the sole or sufficient incentives.
Right.
Yes, tax cut will encourage a lot of these MSVs hopefully to come forward and sort of declare their full incomes, or come do so they were also negatively impacted by demonetization. Right. So tax cut would definitely improve their cash flows, would definitely incentivize them, should definitely incentivize them. But for the Make in India campaign to actually have a substantial impact both on job creation as well as income creation, other supply side constraints would have to be. So regulatory approvals is a big issue.
For MSMEs?
Yeah, for any business to enter, to start functioning, there are a lot of district level, state level approvals that are required. Right? So there has to be some push to reduce. There has been some push to reduce that red tape. Some more push is required there.
Right. Many small companies rely on cash for their working capital, and we know from anecdotal evidence as well as a lot of the growth predictions that the reason why you have a slowdown is because it's the smaller firms that are experiencing problems with supply chain. They've laid off workers. They've sent workers back home. Do you think the 5% tax cut is sufficient compensation for the dislocation that demonetization caused? And I'm not talking of black money. I'm sure many of these firms also cooked their books and didn't pay the kind of tax that they were to pay. But above and beyond that, there is a role that cash plays as a legitimate part of their working capital, and they've all they've had serious constraints. Do you think that if some of these restrictions carry on, as it seems they're likely to, right? There's no word yet from the government or RBI as to when the restrictions on withdrawals are going to be ended completely. Right? We've seen some relaxation on the ATM withdrawal front, but individuals and companies are still constrained by how much cash they can access on a monthly basis. Do you think that would be compensation enough, the tax cut, to deal with this kind of dislocation, the fact that they can't access cash in the way that they used to?
So on cash front, current account withdrawals have been made unlimited, maybe in view of the elections, I don't know. So RBI has said that current account withdrawals are now without a limit. The budget has announced that you cannot have a cash transaction more than 3 lakh of rupees.
Yeah.
So they have, so on the one hand they've made the withdrawal unlimited, but on the other hand they've capped, so that, and they're saying it's based on that SIT that was set up on black money. So, but coming back to your point, yes, it's a fact. See, these MSMEs use cash as a legitimate means of doing transactions. So, informal economy is not necessarily black economy.
Yeah.
Cash is just easy to use, easy to transact, and it's easy to understand. Yeah. So, for a lot of the
and there's no transaction cost, right? Which is something that we haven't factored in yet, right? You start using, Paytm or any of these other sort of e-mechanisms. Somewhere down the line, there is a transaction cost.
There is a transaction cost. There is also a learning cost, right? The cash you don't have, there's no learning cost. It's easy to manage. So for our semi-literate rural population or urban population or people who are dislocated, they don't have, Aadhaar has been a good, but earlier they didn't have identity cards. It was not easy to get a mobile phone connection or anything. So for them, cash is the easiest and it's the safest way to transact. So even SMEs, they work through a lot through a contract labor. So a lot of them have contract labor. Again, driven from the labor laws that we have, contract labor is the favored way of, getting your output and getting your production cycle in. So all of that contract labor is generally paid in cash, and that is white money. That's informal economy, but that's not black money. So the tax incentive is not going to alleviate the short-term constraint that happened. It's because the cash currency crunch impacted their working capital requirement. The tax incentive will start coming in from next year. income earned in this year
Right.
will have this
The benefit next
benefit
year,
of
yeah.
that. Right? So
Yeah.
so it's good for future planning,
Right.
but for the current months,
Right.
they still have to now, of course, with the limits, remonetization happening at a quick pace, money coming back in circulation, some of that pain should go away. But yes, that pain, it will take. I mean, even the finance minister is saying that the pain of demonetization will not carry in the next year, but it's there for this year.
Right. There's some good news in terms of his announcements on affordable housing, financing for affordable housing. Do you think that goes far enough to do you think it'll have a real effect on the uh, volume and speed of real estate, of construction and then real estate transactions?
So one of the notable announcements has been that affordable housing has been given the status as an infrastructure segment,
Yes.
which means that it makes it easier for the construction companies, for the housing companies to access credit. Now, whether they will actually access credit will depend on how how the demand situation is. Post demonetization, the demand situation had really weakened.
Right.
Right? People were not coming into, especially it seemed that the speculative demand on the real estate side was really slowing down. So there is an actual demand. We need affordable housing in the country. Whether that actual demand translates into consumption and purchases, that needs to be seen.
Right. And is there a danger also that giving essentially builders access to easier or concessional credit might at a time when markets are not housing markets aren't doing well, that this may actually have a perverse impact in terms of bad loans, defaults, and so on and so forth?
Uh, so there are other measures being taken by the government simultaneously to curb the problem of bad loans.
Right.
So if those measures again are effectively implemented, I think that's not. If in the balance we are able to push affordable housing
Right.
through this scheme, then
Right.
it's a risk worth taking.
Right. Tell me, the allocation for bank recapitalization this year is 10,000 crore. It struck many of us that this is less than what was provided last year. Given that anybody talks about an impending banking crisis, huge NPAs, government needs to pay more attention to this, or do you think that they're still working to a plan?
I think they're working to a plan. He said at least the speech said that they're allocating 10,000 crores and more if required later will be seen.
Right.
Plus, right now banks have funds because of the money that was deposited, and the same amount of money is not being withdrawn.
Right.
So I think the situation for the government will be clear post March. When I think they will have now they have put a limit to a daily cash. 3 lakhs is the limit that they've put for cash transactions. Now slowly and gradually all other limits on withdrawal should go away.
Right.
So I think post April somewhere when this this entire demonetization is effectively over, then the issue of how much funds is left with the bank.
Right.
So all the people who deposited, how much of it goes out finally, that will determine the situation.
Right. Since presumably money that was held as black money has now been extinguished, supposedly, out of the existing stocks. Isn't it reasonable to assume that when all restrictions on withdrawals end, the public will go back to holding the kind of cash balances they held before? If anything, they may even want to hold more because there's a fear that you may be stuck without cash. So at least for an interim period, you may find withdrawals actually, people withdrawing not only all their money that they were forced to deposit over the last 3 months, but actually maybe a little bit more as well, which could then have an opposite impact on bank liquidity.
Yeah. So in the Indian economy, there is definitely a preference for cash transactions for the multiple reasons we discussed earlier. However, which is why there's so much talk of Bheem app and other e-mobile apps and USSD payments, which do not even require an internet connection for people to do cashless transactions. They're trying to give incentives for digital payments. So if you book through IRCTC, they're going to waive off the service charge, and they're also even trying to reduce the transaction cost on using the credit cards.
Right.
So they're doing a lot to sort of inculcate a cashless behavior. Again, as long as cash remains the most easy way to transact, it will be difficult to supplement. And not all cash is bad. Even the economic survey said that we cannot aim for a completely cashless economy. We just need to redo the balance, not so much in favor of cash.
Right.
So the number of cashless transactions have to increase. They don't have to just swamp out cash altogether.
Yeah. I want to turn to tax and the stated rationale that Mr. Jaitley unveiled today in justifying demonetization, when he said that the whole idea is to move more people into the tax regime. And he cited figures that Mr. Modi in a way also cited at his December 31st speech to the nation. But Mr. Jaitley suggested that since the number of taxpayers who have declared income of more than 10 lakh rupees a year is only 24 lakh, and that this number is too low, and he compared that with 1.25 crore cars that were sold over the last 5 years, and so on and so forth. And he said we're going to, based also on deposits that have taken place in the last 3 months. So there's going to be a lot of data mining that the income tax authorities are going to do. To your mind, at the end of the day, given the capabilities of the income tax authorities, right, do you think it is reasonable to expect that by next year, Mr. Jaitley will be able to claim or will be able to show that the number of taxpayers who have a declared income of greater than 10 lakhs is higher than the 24 lakh today? I mean, how efficient will the income tax authorities be, based on the data they now have available?
Yeah, so this is a little difficult because there is no precedence of an exercise of this scale having been carried out earlier. So there are definitely more efficient tools available with the department. They have a good IT infrastructure in place. They are also becoming, they have now experience of e-filings, everything. So they should be able to mine the data much more effectively. But how much time they're able to and how much officers they're able to devote to this exercise,
Right.
again, this is an unprecedented amount of, examinations
Right.
that they have to undertake.
Right.
Plus, they have to do it in a way that it does not increase the harassment quotient that is, generally associated with the Indian tax officers.
Right. Right.
So it has to be done in a taxpayer-friendly way,
Right.
and it has to be done in a way so as to, legitimately bring this
Right.
exercise to a conclusion.
Right. But some part of this exercise, surely the IT people should have been able to have done beforehand, right? Like if Mr. Jaitley says that 1.25 crore motor cars were sold in the last 5 years. Now, if you buy a car, you have to give your PAN number. Surely the tax department should have been able to correlate the PAN numbers of 1.25 crore cars that have been sold with the list of taxpayers and find out who has, if somebody with a declared income of 8 lakhs or 10 lakhs is buying a Mercedes, then that's, the fact that that exercise hasn't happened and that Mr. Jaitley is today citing this as, a suggestion that many people are lying about their income, I think tells us a little bit about the capabilities of the tax department, that they don't look at data, they are not used to doing this exercise.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually always a question of capability. It is. So Mr. Jaitley has gotten this data also from, from the revenue sources or from the government sources. So they were aware of this data. That's why they were able to sort of present it to the finance minister. But in terms of having to, do this exercise of, using data analytics to actually find out the net of people who need to be tracked and who need to be monitored. So all of that again requires people. So they need to have enough people to carry out this exercise, and they also need to have other resources freed up. So if the revenue department is looking at a GST rollout, for example, so then they'll have resources tied up in doing that exercise. Right. If the revenue department is in the process of looking at other revenue streams, other income tax matters or state tax matters that they are focused on, so they would not have the time and bandwidth to focus on this.
Right. There would have been a lot of cheer all around from Mr. Jaitley's announcement that the tax rate on the lowest bracket is halved, right? I think from 10% to 5% for the lowest slab. Yeah. This obviously benefits people with incomes of less than, I think, 3 or 4 lakhs, perhaps 5 the most, but it benefits everybody because that first slab
benefits everybody.
First slab affects everybody.
Yes.
And his hope, as he said in his speech, was that this may incentivize more people in that lower income range to come forward as taxpayers and to start filing returns. How likely is that? I mean, do you think this will actually serve as an incentive, or will people say, well, if there's no tax to be paid, if I'm earning 4 lakh, why should I bother with filing a return? I mean, the idea is laudable to incentivize or to draw people into the tax net, as it were. But based on what you know of the Indian willingness to file taxes, how likely do you think this is to produce the kind of results he wants? Will we see this increasing the tax base in some way?
Even if there are more people with less than 5 lakh of income filing the returns, how does it really, those people anyways don't compromise the bulk of the income.
So it doesn't affect your revenue collected.
It doesn't affect your revenue collected.
Right.
Those are not the people who are, the bulk of the people who are not filing, who are not paying the right amount of taxes,
Right.
because they're anyways in the lower income category. So it's just a question of getting the information in.
Right.
It doesn't really help the PNL of the country.
But it certainly makes people feel good, which is important, given that people of that income level have suffered because of demonetization.
Yes. So there was a widespread expectation that there would be tax cuts announced. So to sort of put more people,
Right.
more money in people's bank accounts
Right.
through this way.
Right.
So there were three expectations. One, the corporate tax rates would come down, income tax rates would come down, or some sort of universal basic income scheme would be announced. So he's sort of just played around these ideas. He's given some tax rate cut to the MSMEs. He's given some amount of tax rate cut to, in the lowest slab.
Right.
And he's increased the budgetary allocation to Manrega instead of coming with a new universal basic scheme,
Right.
income scheme.
Right. It was significant that there was some discussion under different heads of the speech of increased public-private partnership. He spoke, I think, in the railways section of involving private
stations,
logistical
yeah.
companies for point-to-point management as well as modernization of stations. Do you sort of, and then I think he wants to list a listing of public sector companies. Do you see this government moving faster in the sort of broadly what I would call the privatization space, in terms of involving private companies in activities that were hitherto reserved for the government, and also privatizing public sector companies?
Right. We've had a case that for the past few years, even though the agriculture growth improved this year and there has been more public spending by the government, the private investment is not coming in. So the sluggish private investment environment is not going away. So there has to be a definite push by the government, and government finances are not unlimited also. So a public-private partnership or increasing avenues where private investment can be coaxed to come in, thereby also increasing the credit offtake in the country. So
Right.
all of those avenues need to be explored.
Right.
Again, how effective they are depends on the fine print
Correct.
that they come up with.
Right. He announced the abolition of the FIPB, the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. What's that all about? Is it really the case that the government can do away with this, and that foreign investment can just come in now and not go through any one single board of this kind?
No, I think at least what the budget speech said, and we'll have to see the details, that most of the FDI proposals that were coming in were for the automatic route. So where they did not actually need a specific approval, they were already allowed. So it was more, so there's less need for somebody to examine the detailed application. Where any FDI proposal were to come in, which is not under the automatic route,
Right.
or whether they are whether they're looking for any special sort of environment, economic policy, then of course there would be a need to examine that application and whether an approval can be granted.
Right.
So which is why, while he said that they're going to do away with the FIPB, he's not announced anything concrete. He's saying
Right.
we're going to do a roadmap. So in that roadmap,
So this may well devolve to individual ministries, or that function
Yes.
would then go somewhere
yes,
else.
so there has to be some sort of an alternative that has to be come in, but that alternative probably would have a reduced scope.
Right. In health and education, do you see any significant policy direction that's different from the past?
So in all of the proposals, rural sector or farmers, or the direction is the same. The direction is the same to have specific programs aimed at targeted audiences and increase the budgetary allocations to try and get more effective output out of that. So even in health and education, it is the same. So it's again like new aims have been introduced. Some more policies towards sanitation.
Right. So they're saying piped drinking water for villages that are open defecation free,
Yes,
which is
yes.
quite important.
So linking it to Swachh Bharat, and so all of that is still, the direction is still the same.
Right.
The issue is on how quickly they are able to sort of do this on route.
Right. Mr. Jaitley began his speech by noting three innovations that his government is making with the budget this year. One, that they're merging the railway budget with the general budget. Two, doing away with this revenue and planned expenditure, planned and non-planned expenditure, which was a staple of all budget documents in the past. And third, bringing the date forward to February 1st in order to kind of push all legal changes before the new financial year starts. He was done with the railway part in 3 minutes flat.
Yes.
And it left one wondering, why did Parliament and the railway minister and the public at large waste a whole day each year for the past 30 years or 40 years and an hour or two of Parliament's time on a railway speech with details that Mr. Jaitley dispensed with in 3 minutes. Is there a risk that we've gone too drastic and that the railways, which is an important part of the economy, is not getting the kind of public scrutiny that a budget would give it? Is there that danger?
See, railway continues to be still one of the most important, it is the biggest transport network we have. So what the detailed scrutiny that railways need to have would be there should be there. I mean, we have to say should be there in the budget papers. Also, railways on its own, so railways performance would anyways be measured as consumers get on. So how does the freight network progress? How does the passenger network progress? So all of those things will still have to continue. So the revenue generation from the railways, the safety, which is a primary concern of the passengers, how does the safety network improve for the railway? So he sort of compressed it by saying we are looking at targeting a better operating ratio.
Right.
So all the new measures that are generally announced to say that yes, railways performance is improving, those measures will now be announced as a part of executive that goes through the year.
At least we will spare the endless list of new trains that are announced each year and the kind of lobbying that precedes those lists as MPs try to get their station or their constituency onto them.
So hopefully new trains would still be announced, but that would be a more part of an operational ministry rather than a
lobbying process.
Yes.
Mr. Jaitley also began his speech with some words of caution about the international climate. He spoke of growing threats of protectionism. He spoke of uncertainty about the Federal Reserve's policies in the US. And he also spoke of unpredictability of resource prices, the global slowdown. The international environment is not propitious, even though India is holding its head high, growing at a faster rate than the global average, despite demonetization. I wanted to ask you about the first element, the first danger that Jaitley warned, which is the protectionism. And it's clear he didn't take names, but the context of Trump, Brexit, and generally the building mood in Europe is very clear. We've seen the Trump people already fire the first salvo by talking of H-1B visas and restrictions on, which will effectively make it harder for Indian companies to do the kind of thing they're doing, IT companies in the US. How serious a threat is this to the Indian economy that you would have these kinds of restrictions which would affect IT companies, and what options would the government have at that point?
See, where most of the economists are coming from when they're warning about protectionism, because this was a theme in the economic survey also that was released yesterday, is that the kind of global growth we have seen in the last few decades, especially the way China and other Southeast Asian economies have grown, it has been linked to trade. So their growth, they were able to sort of grow faster because the global trade grew faster.
Right.
So global trade was the engine that pulled them along. So because of rise of protectionism, if the global trade were to come down or the rate of growth were to come down, then this will hurt the other emerging economies, because then the income from exports or income from free flowing capital, so there are two ways that economies benefit. One, you get export income. Two, you get capital, which you may not have readily available otherwise. So both these flows get impacted, and that is the concern.
Right.
So we need capital and we need export income.
Right.
So if more and more countries put restrictions, put trade barriers, then both these sources get impacted.
Correct.
So that's the concern that he was highlighting.
Yes, and obviously, if the budget is to produce the kind of outcome that Mr. Jaitley hopes and Mr. Modi hopes, despite a very adverse international environment and a domestic environment because of demonetization and other factors, clearly some of these predictions, worst case scenarios of IT companies being shut out or the US withdrawing from various other agreements and arrangements, some of those things may not come true. But it's been great having this chat with you, Richa. I think we've covered pretty much the budget highlights. We will have further occasion to talk to you on some of the aspects of this budget as the full sense of what's happened sinks in and we look at the numbers. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, this wraps up this conversation with Richa Gupta of Deloitte, economist with Deloitte. I know I had promised to take questions, but we're completely out of time. But do keep tuning in to thewire.in throughout today and tomorrow and the day after for detailed analysis on the impact of the budget on different sectors of the economy, different sections of the population, and also analysis of the political logic of the budget and its impact in an election season. Thank you so much for tuning in.